He'd given up. Thomas Miller had tried everything, spent millions, hired the best doctors, the best therapists, the best caregivers money could buy. 12 of them. And his son still wouldn't speak, still wouldn't move, still sat in that wheelchair, staring at nothing, trapped somewhere Thomas couldn't reach. So he stopped trying. What else could he do? Then a maid walked into his house. 29 years old, no medical training, no fancy degrees, just a woman with gentle hands and a broken past who looked at his son and saw something no one else did. Thomas Miller used to have everything. A technology empire, a beautiful wife, a son who filled every room with laughter. Then cancer took his wife, 3 years ago, fast and brutal. And 8 months ago, an accident put his 8-year-old son William in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the waist down. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence. William stopped talking, stopped looking at people, just sat in that chair, staring out the window at kids playing in the field, kids who could run, kids who weren't trapped. The doctors couldn't explain it. No brain damage, no reason for him to shut down like this. Thomas tried everything, hired 12 caregivers, people with Harvard degrees and 20 years of experience. He fired them all. Because none of them saw William. They treated him like a project, a case, a problem to solve. And after the 12th one left, Thomas gave up. He stopped calling doctors, stopped praying, stopped hoping. The house became a tomb, staff walking on tiptoes, no music, no laughter, just William by that window and Thomas locked in his office, staring at old photos, trying to remember what happiness felt like. Some nights he'd stand outside William's door, wanting to go in, wanting to hold his son. But he couldn't, because the doctors said William would never walk again, would probably never speak again. And Thomas believed them. He was a billionaire. He could buy almost anything. But he couldn't buy his son back. That's where he was the day Patricia Smith showed up looking for work. Rock bottom, beyond hope. He hired her to clean, dust the furniture, mop the floors. He barely looked at her, just another person passing through. But Patricia wasn't passing through. She'd cared for her brother with cerebral palsy. She knew what it looked like when people gave up on someone, when they stopped seeing the person and only saw the condition. So when she looked at William, she didn't see broken. She saw hurting, and she did something no one else had done. She sat beside him, didn't talk at him, didn't try to fix him, just stayed. And slowly, William started noticing her. Then Patricia found the pill bottles, rows of them, and the dosages were too high, way too high for a child. William wasn't just traumatized. He was being drugged into silence. They stopped the medication, and within weeks, William started waking up. His eyes cleared. He started responding. But he still wouldn't walk. Until that Tuesday afternoon when Patricia looked at him and said, "What if you tried?" And William, terrified, trembling, stood up, took one step, then another, right into her arms. Thomas saw it all, dropped his phone, fell to his knees. Because his paralyzed son was walking, the doctors said impossible, but God said yes. Before we continue, I need you to do something. Hit subscribe, click like, and comment where you're watching from because I want to know if this story is touching you the way it's touching me. This isn't just about a billionaire and a maid. It's about what happens when we refuse to give up on the people we love. I believe kindness comes from the heart, and I believe that when we show up for each other, God shows up too. Now let's keep going, because what happens next will change everything. The Miller mansion sat on 12 acres in Connecticut, surrounded by old trees and iron gates that kept the world out. It used to be beautiful, the kind of place people would slow down to look at when they drove past, the kind of home that felt alive, windows open, music drifting out, a kid's bicycle left on the front lawn. Not anymore. Now it felt like a place where time had stopped, where something terrible had happened and nobody knew how to move forward. Patricia noticed it the moment she stepped inside. The air was too still, too quiet, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to break. The floors were spotless, the furniture perfectly arranged. Every surface gleamed like it had just been polished, but there was no warmth, no life. It reminded Patricia of a museum, Beautiful, expensive, empty. She'd been hired to clean, but as she walked through those silent hallways, she wondered what exactly needed cleaning. Everything already looked untouched, unlived in. Then she understood. This wasn't about dust or dirt. This was about a house that had forgotten how to be a home. The staff moved like ghosts. A housekeeper dusting a table without making a sound. A cook preparing meals no one would eat. Everyone careful, everyone quiet. Like they were afraid to remind anyone they were there. Patricia had seen grief before. She'd lived in it after her mother died, watched it swallow her whole family. So, she recognized the signs. This house was drowning in it. On her second day, she saw him. William. He was sitting in his wheelchair by the big window in the living room, small for 8 years old, dark hair falling into his eyes, hands gripping the armrests like he was holding on to the only solid thing in the world. He was staring outside, at the field beyond the trees where neighborhood kids were playing soccer, running, shouting, laughing. Patricia stopped in the doorway, watched him watching them. His face didn't move, didn't show anything, but his knuckles were white from gripping so hard. And that told her everything. This boy wasn't empty. He was full of pain he didn't know how to let out. She didn't walk over, didn't announce herself with some cheerful greeting like she was sure the others had done. She just picked up her cleaning supplies and quietly started dusting the bookshelf across the room. Gave him space. Let him know she was there without demanding anything from him. After a few minutes, she glanced over. His head hadn't turned, but his eyes had shifted. He was watching her. Just a little, just enough. Patricia kept working, didn't acknowledge it, didn't make a big deal out of it. But inside, her heart was beating faster. Because that look, that tiny flicker of awareness, told her something the doctors and the caregivers had missed. William wasn't gone. He was still in there, waiting for someone to see him. Patricia learned about the 12 nannies from the housekeeper. Mrs. Chen had worked for the Millers for 6 years. She remembered when the house was different, when William's mother was alive and laughter echoed through these rooms. Now she spoke in whispers, like raising her voice might shatter something. They were all qualified, Mrs. Chen said, folding towels in the laundry room. The first one had a degree from some fancy school in Boston. Child psychology, I think. She lasted 3 weeks. Patricia listened, wiping down the counters. She tried everything. Games, exercises, talked to William like he was a baby. He never responded. Not once. Mr. Miller let her go. Mrs. Chen shook her head. Then came the others, each one more experienced than the last. One woman had worked with paralyzed children for 15 years. Another came recommended by someone important, a senator, maybe. Didn't matter. None of them could reach him. What did they do wrong? Patricia asked quietly. Mrs. Chen paused, thought about it. They treated him like a job, she finally said, like he was something to fix. They'd move him around, do their therapy routines, mark things off on their charts. Professional. Efficient. She looked up. But cold, you know what I mean? Patricia nodded. She knew exactly what that meant. By the time the 12th one left, Mr. Miller stopped looking for replacements. I think he decided it was pointless, that nobody could help William, that this was just how things were going to be. That afternoon, Patricia saw Thomas Miller for the first time since her interview. He was standing at the top of the stairs, looking down at the foyer like he was trying to remember why he'd come out of his office. He looked exhausted, not just tired, hollowed out, like someone who hadn't slept properly in months. His expensive suit hung a little loose on his frame. His eyes had dark circles under them. He was 44, Patricia knew, but he looked older. Grief did that, aged you from the inside out. He glanced at her briefly. No recognition, no acknowledgement, just a man looking through her like she was part of the furniture. Then he turned and went back into his office. The door closed with a soft click. Patricia understood. He'd given up on William. But more than that, he'd given up on himself. This wasn't just about a paralyzed child who wouldn't speak. This was about a father who couldn't bear to keep trying, who'd convinced himself that hope was more dangerous than despair, because hope meant risking another failure, another disappointment, another reminder that he couldn't save the people he loved. So he'd locked himself away, built walls around his heart, stopped feeling anything because feeling meant hurting, and he'd already hurt enough for one lifetime. Patricia stood in that quiet hallway, looking at the closed office door. She thought about her brother Marcus, how many people had given up on him, how many doctors had written him off, how many times she'd wanted to give up too. But she hadn't, because giving up on someone doesn't make the pain go away. It just adds guilt to the grief. She turned and walked back toward the living room. William was still by the window, still watching those kids play, still holding on. And Patricia made a decision right there. She wasn't going to be like the others. She wasn't going to treat this boy like a problem that needed solving. She was going to treat him like a person who needed seeing. It happened on Patricia's third day. She was polishing the wooden table outside William's room, the one with the vase that nobody ever put flowers in anymore. The house was quiet like always, Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, Thomas locked in his office, the rest of the staff moving through their routines like clockwork. Then Patricia heard it. A sound, small, choked, not quite crying, more like breathing that hurt. She stopped, listened. It came again. She set down her cloth and walked to William's doorway. He was by the window, same spot as always, but something was different. His hands were gripping the armrests so tight his knuckles had gone white. His whole body was tense, rigid. Outside, those neighborhood kids were playing again, kicking a soccer ball back and forth. One of them scored a goal and threw his arms up, celebrating. William's chin trembled. Patricia's heart clenched. She didn't think, didn't plan what to say, just walked over and knelt down beside his wheelchair. Close enough that he'd know she was there, not so close that she crowded him. "That looks like it hurts to watch," she said quietly. William didn't move, didn't look at her, but his breathing changed, got a little faster. Patricia looked out at those kids, watched them run and laugh and live in bodies that worked the way they were supposed to. "My little brother used to watch kids play basketball from our apartment window," she said. Her voice was soft, gentle. "Marcus. He had cerebral palsy, couldn't run like they did, couldn't jump or shoot hoops or any of that." She paused, remembered. It made him so angry sometimes. He'd watch them for hours and then cry, just cry and cry because he wanted to be out there so badly and his body wouldn't let him. William's fingers twitched. Patricia kept her eyes on the window, didn't look at him, gave him space to feel without being watched. "You know what helped him?" she continued. "Not much, honestly. But one thing that made it a little easier was when someone would just sit with him, not try to cheer him up. Not tell him it would be okay. Just be there, in it with him." She went quiet after that. Didn't say anything else. Didn't ask him questions. Didn't wait for a response. Just stayed there, kneeling on the floor beside his chair. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. The kids outside packed up their ball and headed home. The field went empty. William's grip on the armrests loosened, just slightly. And then Patricia felt it. His hand, small and trembling, reaching down, touching her shoulder, just once, barely a second, then pulling back like he'd touched something hot. But it happened. Patricia's breath caught. She didn't react, didn't turn her head or smile or acknowledge it. Just stayed still. Let that tiny moment of connection exist without making it bigger than it was. After another minute, she stood up slowly. "I'll be right outside if you need anything," she said. And she left. Walked back into the hallway on legs that felt shaky. Picked up her cleaning cloth with hands that weren't quite steady. Thomas was standing at the end of the hall. He'd been walking past, saw the whole thing through the open door. His face was unreadable, shocked, maybe, or afraid to believe what he'd just witnessed. Because in 8 months, none of those 12 caregivers, none of those trained professionals had gotten even that much response from William. Not a touch, not a glance, nothing. Patricia met his eyes briefly, said nothing, just went back to polishing the table. But inside, her heart was pounding, because that touch, that one trembling moment, meant everything. It meant William was still in there, still aware, still capable of reaching out. He just needed someone who wouldn't push, someone who'd wait, Someone who understood that healing doesn't happen on a schedule. It happens in small, quiet moments when a hurting soul finally believes it's safe to try. Thomas couldn't stop thinking about it. That moment, William's hand reaching out, touching Patricia's shoulder. It was such a small thing. Lasted maybe a second. Most people would have missed it. But Thomas had seen it, and he didn't know what to do with what he'd seen. He sat in his office that night, staring at his computer screen without seeing it. His mind kept replaying the scene, the way Patricia had knelt beside William's chair, the way she'd spoken not at him, but near him, like she was just sharing space instead of demanding anything. And William had responded. After 8 months of silence, after 12 caregivers who tried everything, after Thomas himself had stopped trying. A maid had gotten through. It didn't make sense. Thomas wanted to feel hope, wanted to believe this meant something, but hope was dangerous. He'd learned that the hard way. Hope meant caring, and caring meant hurting when things fell apart again. So he pushed it down, told himself it was a fluke, a coincidence, probably meant nothing. But he couldn't quite make himself believe it. Over the next few days, Thomas found himself watching. Not obviously. He didn't hover or ask questions, just noticed. He'd walk past the living room and see Patricia sitting on the floor near William's chair, folding laundry or sorting through mail, not talking, just there. He'd pass by the kitchen and hear her humming softly while she cleaned, the same melody every time, something gentle and low that seemed to settle into the walls. And William was different. Not dramatically, not in ways most people would see. But Thomas saw. The way William's eyes would follow Patricia when she moved through a room, the way his breathing would slow when she hummed, the way he'd turn his head just slightly when she spoke. Small things, tiny shifts, but real. Thomas didn't know what to do with it, didn't know if he should say something or stay silent, didn't know if acknowledging it would somehow break whatever fragile thing was forming. So he just watched, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Fear. Not fear that nothing would change. Fear that something would, because if Patricia could reach William, if there was actually a chance his son could come back, then Thomas would have to face something he'd been avoiding. His own guilt. The accident had been his fault. He'd been distracted, taking a business call, eyes on his phone instead of the road. 1 second of not paying attention, that's all it took. And William paid the price. Thomas had buried that truth deep, told himself there was no point dwelling on it, no point torturing himself. But if William healed, if he came back, Thomas would have to look his son in the eyes knowing what he'd done, knowing he was the reason William had been in that chair in the first place. So part of him, a part he hated, almost hoped Patricia would fail. Not because he didn't love his son, but because loving him and facing what he'd done felt impossible to hold at the same time. That evening, Thomas stood outside William's room again. He could hear Patricia inside, talking softly about something, a story maybe. Her voice was warm, easy. William wasn't responding, but Thomas could tell he was listening. Thomas put his hand on the doorknob, almost turned it, almost went inside. But he couldn't, because walking into that room meant being a father again, and he didn't know if he deserved that anymore. So he stood there, hand on the knob, frozen. Then he let go, turned around, and walked back to his office, where it was safe, where he didn't have to feel anything, where hope couldn't hurt him. Patricia was cleaning Thomas's office on a Thursday afternoon. He was out, some meeting in the city. The room smelled like old leather and expensive cologne. She dusted the bookshelves, wiped down the desk, tried not to look at the framed photographs lining the walls, but she couldn't help it. There was one of Thomas and a woman, beautiful, smiling, her head on his shoulder. His wife. Another showed the three of them, Thomas, his wife, and a little boy with dark hair and bright eyes, William, maybe 5 years old, holding up a toy airplane. He looked so alive in that picture, so present. Patricia's chest tightened. She turned away, opened the desk drawer to dust inside. That's when she saw it. A small silver music box, tarnished slightly, like it hadn't been touched in a long time. She picked it up carefully, turned it over. There was an inscription on the bottom, To William, may you always dance through life. Love, Mum. Patricia's eyes burned. She opened the box. A tiny ballerina stood frozen inside, waiting. She wound the key on the side. The mechanism clicked softly. Then music, delicate, haunting. Debussy, Clair de Lune. Patricia stood there listening, watching that little ballerina spin. And she just knew this was something William needed. She didn't ask permission, didn't tell Thomas she'd found it. Just closed the box carefully, slipped it into her apron pocket. And that evening, after dinner, she brought it to William's room. He was in his usual spot, by the window, the sun setting behind the trees, turning everything gold and purple. Patricia walked over, sat down on the floor beside his chair. "I found something today," she said quietly. She pulled out the music box, set it on her lap. William's eyes shifted, looked down at it. Patricia wound the key, let it play. The music filled the room, soft and sad and beautiful. William's whole body went still, not the frozen stillness he usually carried, something different, like he was listening with every part of himself. The ballerina spun, the melody played, and then Patricia saw it. William's face cracked. His chin trembled, his eyes filled with tears. And for the first time in 8 months, he cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears rolling down his cheeks while that music played. Patricia's own eyes filled, but she didn't wipe her face, didn't try to stop his tears. Just let the moment be what it was. "You miss her," Patricia whispered. William's breath hitched. "I know, sweetheart, I know," Patricia's voice broke. "I miss my mama too. She passed when I was 17, and sometimes it still hurts so much I can't breathe." She let the music continue. "It's okay to miss her, William. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to feel all of it." William turned his head, looked right at her, really looked, for the first time. And his mouth opened. His lips formed words that came out broken and small. "She's gone." 2 words, but they shattered everything. Patricia nodded, tears streaming now. "Yes, baby, she is. She's not coming back." "No, she's not." William's face crumpled. More tears, his whole body shaking with grief he'd been holding in for so long. Patricia reached out slowly, touched his hand. He didn't pull away. "But you're still here," she said gently. "You're still here, William. And you're not alone. I promise you're not alone." The music box wound down, the ballerina slowed, stopped. But William kept crying, and Patricia kept holding his hand, letting him break, letting him feel. Because sometimes that's what healing looks like. Not fixing, not moving forward, just finally letting yourself fall apart. In the hallway, Thomas stood frozen. He'd come home early, heard the music from downstairs. His wife's music box, the one he'd hidden because hearing it was too painful. He'd walked up to tell Patricia to put it away. But then he'd heard William speak. 2 years of silence, months of therapy, 12 caregivers. And a maid with a music box had done what no one else could. She'd made his son feel safe enough to break. Thomas leaned against the wall, slid down to the floor, put his head in his hands. And for the first time since his wife died, he let himself cry too. Patricia couldn't sleep that night. Something was bothering her, something she couldn't name. She kept thinking about William, the way he'd cried, the way he'd spoken, but also the way his words had come out, slow, slurred slightly, like his mouth couldn't quite form them properly. And his eyes, even when he'd looked at her, really looked, there'd been something off, a fog, a distance. She'd seen that look before, years ago, when she'd worked as a home health aide, an elderly woman whose daughter kept increasing her pain medication without telling the doctors. The woman had stopped talking, stopped eating, just stared at the TV all day. Over-medicated, that's what the nurse had called it. Patricia sat up in bed. No, she was overthinking, connecting things that weren't connected. But the thought wouldn't leave. The next morning, she asked Mrs. Chen about William's medications. "Oh, he's on quite a bit, Mrs." Chen said, "Chopping vegetables. Mr. Miller keeps them in his office. The doctor comes every 2 weeks to check on him. Very expensive. Very specialized. What doctor? Dr. Sorensen. Been treating William since right after the accident. Patricia nodded, kept her face neutral, but her stomach was tight. That afternoon, when Thomas left for another meeting, Patricia went back to his office. She told herself she was just cleaning, just doing her job. But her hands were shaking when she opened the desk drawer. The pill bottles were lined up in neat rows, orange prescription bottles with white labels. She picked up the first one. Read it. Muscle relaxant. For William Miller, take twice daily. The dosage made her pause. She picked up another. Pain medication. The dosage was high, higher than she'd expect for a child. Another bottle. Anti-anxiety medication. Another. Something for sleep. Patricia's hands were trembling now. She pulled out her phone, looked up the medications, read about side effects. Drowsiness, confusion, emotional withdrawal, difficulty speaking. Her heart was pounding. She looked at the dates on the bottles. Some of them had been refilled 4 or 5 times, all from the same doctor. This wasn't treatment. This was sedation. Someone had been drugging William into silence. Patricia sat down hard in Thomas's chair. All this time, 8 months of everyone thinking William had shut down from trauma, that he'd given up, that he couldn't be reached. But what if he'd been trying? What if he'd been screaming inside his own head and the medication had buried him so deep he couldn't get out? She thought about his vacant stare, his lack of response to the caregivers, the way he'd seemed so unreachable. Not broken, buried. Patricia stood up, paced the room. She had to tell Thomas, had to show him what she'd found. But what if he didn't believe her? What if he thought she was overstepping? She was just the maid, the cleaning woman. Who was she to question a doctor? She thought about William. Those tears, that broken voice saying she's gone. He was in there, fighting to get out. And someone, intentionally or not, had been pushing him further down. Patricia grabbed the bottles, all of them. Her heart was racing, but her hands were steady now. She didn't care if Thomas fired her, didn't care if he thought she was crazy. She was going to save that boy, even if it cost her everything. When Thomas came home that evening, Patricia was waiting in his office. The pill bottles spread across his desk. He stopped in the doorway, stared at them, then at her. "What are you doing?" Patricia stood up, met his eyes. "Mr. Miller," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something about your son." "Patricia, William isn't broken." Her voice was steady, firm. "He's being drugged." Thomas went very still. "What?" "These medications." She gestured to the bottles. "The dosages are too high, way too high for a child his size. I've worked in home health care. I've seen this before. These drugs combined like this, they're not helping him. They're burying him." Thomas's face had gone pale. "Dr. Sorensen prescribed." "I don't care what Dr. Sorensen prescribed." Patricia's voice cracked. "Look at your son, Mr. Miller. Really look at him. That vacant stare. The way he doesn't respond, that's not grief. That's not trauma. That's what happens when someone is over-medicated." Thomas picked up one of the bottles. "Read the label." His hands started shaking. "How long has he been on these?" "According to the refill dates, since right after the accident. 8 months. Thomas's face crumpled. "Oh, God." He sat down, put his head in his hands. "I trusted him. Dr. Sorensen came so highly recommended. I thought he was helping." Patricia knelt beside his chair. "You didn't know," she said gently. "You were grieving. You trusted someone you thought had your son's best interests at heart. I've been poisoning my own child." "No, you've been trying to help him, but now you know the truth, and now you can fix it." Thomas looked up at her, his eyes red. "What do I do?" "Call another doctor, tonight, get a second opinion, and if I'm right, if these medications are the problem, we stop them, safely, under supervision." Thomas nodded, reached for his phone with shaking hands, and Patricia stood there, watching this powerful man break, knowing that sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. First, it destroys you. Then it rebuilds you into something stronger. The new doctor came that same night. Dr. Rashid, a neurologist from Yale. She examined William quietly, reviewed his medications, ran her fingers down the list of prescriptions. Then she looked at Thomas with something close to anger. "These dosages," she said carefully, "are inappropriate for a child, especially in combination. This would sedate an adult. For an 8-year-old? She shook her head. "Mr. Miller, your son has essentially been chemically restrained for 8 months. Thomas didn't say anything, just stood there taking it. "We need to taper him off, slowly. Stopping cold turkey could cause seizures or worse. But yes, these medications are likely responsible for much of his unresponsiveness." After she left, Thomas sat alone in the living room. The house was dark. Everyone had gone to bed. He thought about all those months, all those caregivers he'd hired and fired, all those nights he'd stood outside William's door, convinced his son was unreachable. And the whole time, William had been drowning in chemicals. Thomas had trusted Dr. Sorensen, never questioned him. The man had credentials, reputation, references. And he'd been slowly destroying William. Why? Money, probably. More prescriptions meant more visits, more billable hours. Thomas's wealth had made him a target, made his grief exploitable. And he'd been too broken to see it. Thomas put his face in his hands. He'd already failed William once. The accident, his distraction, his fault. And then he'd failed him again, by trusting the wrong person, by not paying attention, by being so lost in his own pain that he couldn't see his son's. How many times could one father fail the same child? Upstairs, Patricia checked on William before bed. He was sleeping. The music box sat on his nightstand where she'd left it. She watched his chest rise and fall, listened to him breathe. "We're going to get you back," she whispered. "I promise." The medication taper took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Dr. Rashid visiting every few days, of careful reduction, of watching for withdrawal symptoms. And slowly, so slowly, William started to change. The fog began to lift. His eyes got clearer, brighter, like someone had turned up a light inside him. He started tracking movement better, following conversations even when he wasn't part of them. One morning, Patricia brought him breakfast and he looked at her and said, "Thank you." 2 words, quiet but clear. Mrs. Chen heard it from the hallway and started crying. Thomas noticed too. How could he not? William was waking up, looking around like he was seeing the house for the first time, touching things, the fabric of his shirt, the wheel of his chair, like he was remembering what it felt like to be present in his own body. He ate more, not a lot, but more than before, actually seemed to taste the food instead of just mechanically chewing. And he talked, not constantly, not in full sentences yet, but words came, small observations, questions. "Where's the music box? Is it Tuesday? Can I have water?" Each one felt like a miracle. But the biggest change was how he looked at Patricia, not with that distant, foggy stare, but with recognition, gratitude, trust. She'd sit with him in the afternoons, and he'd reach for her hand now, hold it, like she was the only solid thing in a world that was still coming back into focus. Thomas watched it all from a distance. He wanted to be part of it, wanted to go to his son, talk to him, hold him. But the guilt kept him frozen. Every time William spoke, Thomas heard the echo of 8 months lost. 8 months William could have been healing if Thomas had just paid attention, just asked questions, just been a better father. Patricia noticed. How could she not? The way Thomas would stand in doorways but never come in, the way he'd watch William but never approach. One evening, she found him in his office, staring at nothing. "He's getting better," she said gently. Thomas nodded. "Because of you. Because we stopped the medications. Because he's finally being seen properly. Because you cared enough to look." Thomas's voice was rough. "You were here 3 days and you saw what I missed for 8 months. You were grieving. I was his father." Thomas's hands clenched. "That's supposed to mean something. I'm supposed to protect him, keep him safe. And instead He couldn't finish." Patricia stepped closer. "Mr. Miller, William is getting better. That's what matters now. Not what happened before, what you do next." "What if he doesn't forgive me?" "For what?" "The accident, the medications, all of it." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Then you love him anyway," she said simply. "You show up, every day. You do better, and you let him decide when he's ready. Thomas looked at her. This woman who'd walked into his house a month ago and turned everything upside down. Why do you care so much? He asked. Patricia smiled sadly. Because somebody cared about my brother when the rest of the world gave up on him, and it saved his life. She paused. We all need someone who refuses to quit on us, even when we've quit on ourselves. Thomas felt something break open in his chest. Not painful, just open, like a door he'd kept locked was finally swinging wide. Thank you, he whispered. Patricia nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. Mr. Miller, your son is awake now, really awake, and he needs his father. She left him sitting there, in the dark, with a choice to make. It happened on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after Patricia first arrived. The house felt different now, lighter, like someone had opened windows that had been sealed shut for months. William was in the living room. Patricia had moved him there after breakfast. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, warming the old rug where she'd spread out a set of wooden blocks. She sat cross-legged on the floor, William in his chair beside her. Want to build something? She asked. William nodded. He'd been nodding more, responding more. His words were still careful, still forming slowly, but they came. Patricia handed him a red block. He took it, set it down. Then a blue one, yellow, green. They built together, a tower, unsteady but growing. William placed the next block carefully, his hands steadier than they'd been weeks ago. The tower wobbled, then fell. Blocks scattered across the floor. A blue one rolled under a chair 8 feet away. Oh no, Patricia said with exaggerated disappointment. That's my favorite. William looked at the block, then at his chair, then at Patricia. Something passed across his face. Thought. Real, active thought. What if, Patricia said slowly, an idea forming. What if you tried to get it? William stared at her. Can't, he said quietly. Can't walk. Patricia shifted, knelt in front of him, so they were eye level. What if you can? The doctors said. I know what the doctors said, sweetheart, but your spine was damaged, not destroyed. And your brain is perfect. You're awake now, really awake. And sometimes, she paused, sometimes our bodies can do more than we think. William looked terrified. What if I fall? Then I'll catch you. What if it doesn't work? Then we'll try again tomorrow, and the day after, until it does. William stared at her hands. She was holding them out, steady, sure. Do you trust me? Patricia asked softly. William's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. He gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, pushed. Nothing happened. Patricia kept her hands extended, didn't move, didn't speak. William pushed again, harder. His right leg twitched. Patricia's breath caught. Then his left leg moved, just slightly. And with a strength that shouldn't have existed with muscles that hadn't been used in 8 months, William pushed himself up. His legs shook violently, his whole body trembling like he might collapse any second. But he didn't. He stood. That's it, Patricia whispered. You're doing it, William. You're standing. William looked down at his legs, at the floor beneath his feet, then at Patricia's hands. And he moved. 1 foot forward, shuffling, unsteady. Then the other. His face twisted with effort, with fear, with determination. Another step. Patricia's eyes flooded with tears. Come on, baby. You've got this. I'm right here. William took 1 more step. Then his legs gave out. He fell forward. Patricia caught him, wrapped her arms around him as they both sank to the floor. Did you see? William gasped against her shoulder. Did you see me? I saw you. Patricia was crying now, full tears streaming down her face. I saw you, William. You walked. You did it. I walked. You walked. Thomas had been passing by, on his way to another meeting, phone in one hand, briefcase in the other. He glanced into the living room and stopped breathing. His son, his paralyzed son, was on the floor in Patricia's arms. His wheelchair was empty, 8 feet away. The phone slipped from Thomas's hand, hit the floor with a crack. The briefcase followed. Thomas stood frozen, staring. William looked up, saw his father, and smiled. The first real smile Thomas had seen in 8 months. "Hi, Daddy," William said. "I walked." Thomas's legs gave out. He fell to his knees, crawled across that expensive floor to where his son sat with Patricia. "William," his voice broke. "Oh God, William." He reached out with shaking hands, touched William's face, his hair, like he was checking if this was real. William launched himself at his father. Thomas caught him, held him, buried his face in his son's hair, and sobbed. "I'm sorry," Thomas choked out. "I'm so sorry. For everything. For all of it. It's okay, Daddy. It's not. I failed you. You're here now," William said simply. And somehow, that was enough. The three of them sat on that floor, crying, laughing, holding each other. Outside, the world kept spinning. People drove past, birds sang, life continued. But inside the Miller mansion, time stopped, because something impossible had just happened. Not just William walking, but a family broken and scattered and lost finding each other again. Patricia looked at Thomas holding his son, at William's face pressed against his father's chest, at the sunlight pouring through the windows, lighting them both up like something sacred. And she knew this was why she'd stayed. This moment, this miracle, this proof that broken things can heal, if someone loves them enough to believe they can. 2 months later, the Miller mansion didn't feel like a tomb anymore. Windows stayed open, music played softly from the kitchen, laughter, real laughter, echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long. William could walk now, not perfectly, not without help, but he could stand, could move across a room with Patricia beside him or using the walker the physical therapist brought. Every day, a little stronger, a little steadier. The doctors had no explanation, called it spontaneous recovery, a miracle of neuroplasticity. Said the medication withdrawal combined with emotional support had allowed his body to heal in ways they hadn't thought possible. Patricia just called it William being William, fighting his way back. Thomas had changed too. He'd started therapy, finally dealing with the grief he'd buried when his wife died, the guilt over the accident, the shame of not seeing what was happening to his son. It was hard, painful. Some days he'd come out of his sessions looking like he'd been through a war. But he kept going, because running from pain hadn't saved him. It had nearly destroyed what was left of his family. One evening, Thomas found Patricia in William's room. She was reading to him, some story about dragons and knights. William's eyes were heavy, fighting sleep but not wanting the story to end. Thomas knocked softly on the doorframe. Patricia looked up, smiled. "Come in," William said, his voice still quiet but clear now. "Present." Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, something he'd been doing more and more. Not standing in doorways anymore, not watching from a distance. Being there, really there. Patricia finished the chapter, closed the book. "All right, sweetheart, time for sleep." William nodded, looked at his father. "Will you stay?" he asked. Thomas's throat tightened. "Of course." Patricia stood to leave. "Give them space." But William reached for her hand. "You too," he said. "Both of you." So they stayed, Thomas on one side of the bed, Patricia in the chair beside it. William's eyes drifted closed, his breathing slowed. After a few minutes, Thomas spoke quietly. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you've done for us, for William, for me." Patricia shook her head. You saved us." Thomas's voice was firm, certain. "You saw my son when no one else could. You fought for him when I'd given up. You gave us back our lives." "William did the work," Patricia said softly. "He's the brave one. But you believed in him, even when I couldn't believe in anything." Thomas paused, looked at William sleeping peacefully. "I want you to stay," he said, "not as a maid, as family, if you'll have us." Patricia's eyes filled. "I want to make this official," Thomas continued. "A permanent position, as William's companion, with a real salary, benefits, your own space here." He met her eyes. "I know it's not about the money for you, but I need you to know you're valued, that you're not just hired help. You're part of this family now. Patricia looked at William. This boy she'd helped pull out of darkness. This child who'd fought so hard to come back. I'd be honored, she whispered. Thomas nodded, cleared his throat. They sat in comfortable silence, watching William sleep. After a while, William stirred, opened his eyes halfway. Patricia, I'm here, baby. Will you sing the song from before? Patricia smiled, started humming. That same lullaby she'd hummed his first week there. William's hand found hers, held tight. Love you, he mumbled, already drifting. I love you too, William. Love you both, he added, including his father. Thomas's face crumpled, but he smiled through it. Love you too, son, so much. William's breathing evened out, deep, peaceful. Patricia stood quietly, started to leave. Thank you, Thomas said, for everything. Patricia paused at the door, looked back at this man who'd been so lost, who'd found his way back to his son. You know what I learned from my brother, she said softly, that the people we love are never really broken. Sometimes they're just waiting for someone to see them clearly. To love them exactly as they are, not who they used to be or who we want them to be, just them. Thomas nodded, understood. William didn't need fixing, Patricia continued. He needed someone to believe he was still in there, still worth fighting for. She smiled. And he is, Mr. Miller. He really is. After she left, Thomas sat with his son, watched him breathe, watched him sleep without medication clouding his mind, watched him exist peacefully in a body that was healing. And Thomas thought about the last year, the darkness, the loss, the hopelessness, how close he'd come to losing everything. But then a maid walked into his house, a woman with no credentials except a compassionate heart, and she'd shown him that miracles don't always look like lightning from heaven. Sometimes they look like patience, like showing up every day, like refusing to give up when everything says you should. Sometimes they look like a woman kneeling beside a wheelchair and saying, I see you. Thomas reached out, touched William's hair gently. I see you now, son, he whispered. I promise, I see you. And somewhere in his sleep, William smiled. The Miller mansion wasn't perfect. Healing takes time. There would still be hard days, physical therapy, emotional work, learning to be a family again. But they had something they didn't have before, hope, and each other, and a woman who'd reminded them that broken things can be made whole, not with money or medicine, but with love, patience, presence, with someone who refuses to walk away, someone who stays, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because that's what family does, real family, the kind you choose, the kind that saves you, the kind that changes everything.